Hello, happy Friday, and welcome to another edition of The Corner 3 here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. As always, I'm your host, Cale Berger, and it was a jam-packed, exciting week in the NBA once again. Not only the conference finals getting underway between the Warriors and Trailblazers and the Raptors and Bucks, but also it was the NBA draft lottery this weekend. We finally got a picture of where some of these guys in the draft are going to go, who's picking where, who are the winners, who are the losers. We're going to break that all down here in the first half of the show. Later on, going to give you my tentative mock draft of where I think some guys can go, and maybe if some of those teams will even hold on to their picks going forward here. And then as we round things out later on, we're going to talk about what the Trailblazers can do to get back in this series down 2-0 to the Warriors, going back to Portland, and if the Raptors have enough firepower, if they have enough to be able to overtake the Bucks and end up winning the series to advance onto the NBA Finals. So first things first, it was the NBA draft lottery this week, and as we know, the big winners were the New Orleans Pelicans. As you see the draft order there after the lottery took place. The big winners were clearly the Pelicans. And the Pelicans, they came in with not necessarily the best odds of securing the number one pick, only a 6% chance for New Orleans to get that first overall pick, but nevertheless, they were able to grab it, and all signs point, as we pretty much everyone knew, everyone believed, New Orleans will be taking Zion Williamson with that first overall pick. There's no other option. It doesn't make sense to go anywhere else for them. It has to be Zion. And this it works out in their favor, but I also think that this can make some things, not more difficult, but a little more confusing, because we know that they had the Anthony Davis fiasco drama all season that was a constant cloud over the organization. You didn't know if he was going to play night in and night out. Some nights he was sitting in the fourth quarter in games they could have clearly won. Well, I guess if you believe in tanking, if you believe in giving yourself the best possible opportunity to get a top pick, I guess that was all worth it, because even though there's a really good chance that they're going to lose a all-NBA level talent, one of the best players of the current NBA, in Anthony Davis, they got really lucky here, because even with that 6% chance of getting that first overall pick, they end up being able to pretty much, replace him with a guy just as good, with just as much potential, and a guy that it's going to bring in the bright lights, the attention to the franchise, to the city of New Orleans, in Zion Williamson. So it works out for them in the sense that now they are not, as fearful of trading away Anthony Davis because of a fear that they won't be able to replace him, or that the franchise will go even farther down the toilet if they trade away one of the top 5 players in the NBA in Davis. But I think now that they have the chance to get Zion, I think that this makes it way more likely that they make a deal, and probably helps out some other teams, because they might not be asking for the same huge asking price that they had originally for Davis that they had before they knew they were going to get the first overall pick. And for other teams, they might have a little more leverage now, knowing, okay, we don't have to give up the farm because they've already gotten their first overall pick. They're already getting Zion. So that means maybe we don't have to give up as many first-round picks or as many young players, even though they're going to try and build around their young star in Zion if they do end up picking him. I think that they kind of feel that they're set, and they feel that, okay, we can take a step back, survey the landscape once again, and see, okay, we don't have to ask for some ridiculous deal-breaking trade from another team, when maybe we can ask for a little less, still get a favorable return for Anthony Davis, but it makes it more likely for them to get a deal done, and more likely for other teams that they are able to get a top 5 talent in Anthony Davis while not giving up the entire team, the entire future, and mortgaging the franchise by giving up draft picks and young players. So I think this works out in a favorable situation for a lot of the teams and front offices with regards to the Anthony Davis sweepstakes. What I will say, though, is I'm not sure if this is the best possible scenario for the NBA and basketball as a whole. for Zion to go to New Orleans. New Orleans is a small market team. New Orleans is a city that is a great sports town, but I think a sports town that really only cares about their Saints. And the Pelicans are definitely second fiddle, an afterthought in New Orleans. And I think for the NBA, when they're looking at marketing Zion on using his image and likeness as the next the next LeBron in a sense, as being the next heir apparent to be the guy that carries the torch for the league in terms of a league ambassador of the next great superstar. I think this is the worst possible scenario for the NBA because, just what I said, he's in New Orleans. It would have been great if he ended up in New York with the Knicks, Chicago with the Bulls, or even the team that got the 4th overall pick in the Lakers if he ended up in LA with LeBron. I mean, that would have been like nuclear level explosion. It would have been ridiculous if that happened. But it ends up being where this kind of seems to be the worst case scenario because he's not in a big market where I know I always preach on this show that it doesn't matter, where you play. It doesn't matter, in a small market or a big market, you're going to sell shoes. You're going to have an image. You're going to have a brand. I get that. But also, it has to be said that when it's the massive brand that's already established like Zion, this isn't like Russell Westbrook playing in Oklahoma City or Paul George playing in Oklahoma City. I mean, this is a super megastar that is world-renowned already with a huge brand that is going to make millions of dollars, if not billions down the road, in shoe contracts and endorsements. It is kind of an issue that he is in New Orleans because you would like to be able to market him right off the bat as the next great stud. And I know that LeBron was a similar situation when he was the heir apparent, when he was the chosen one. He was the new king coming in from high school. And when he ended up going to the Cavs, I know that Cleveland's a small market as well, but it was different for LeBron because LeBron, they were able to sell that, he's playing at home. He's staying home in his city. He's from Akron. He's playing in Ohio, in Cleveland. They were able to sell that and market that in a way where, okay, even though he's not in a big market, even though he's not in a huge city like New York or LA, or at least at the time, they were able to market it as, okay, this is the guy that's going to bring the Cleveland Cavaliers out of the depths of despair, the savior for the city, and that's what he ended up being in the second time around when returning from Miami. So I don't think it compares necessarily so closely to LeBron going to Cleveland, but I still think that this is probably worst case scenario in terms of publicity, in terms of marketing, and just in terms of overall excitement for the NBA to have Zion go to the Pelicans. But still, I think the Pelicans were clearly the biggest winner, and I think it helps a lot of other teams in the league as well that they're probably not going to be asking for as much because they've already secured their future with the number 1 overall pick, which will be Zion Williamson. The second biggest winner, I have to say, is the Memphis Grizzlies, who ended up getting the 2nd overall pick. And that's definitely going to be Ja Morant. I mean, they've already pretty much made it widely known, public, that with the 2nd pick, unless for some reason Zion were to fall, which he won't, that Ja Morant will be their pick at 2. And I think it's a perfectly, it's a smart decision by them. They already have Jaren Jackson Jr., the young big man from Michigan State who was drafted last year in the top 5 that is going to be their big man of the future, I guess, taking the reins from Marc Gasol. And they have Mike Conley, who's wrapped up for another 2 years. Next year, supposed to make over $32 million, and in 2021, over $34 million, the one-time highest-paid player in NBA history. I know people forget that. I try not to. But they're paying a ton of money to Mike Conley over the next 2 years here. The franchise is in the toilet. They need to rebuild. They need to go full rebuild. So I think there's a perfect scenario where this summer we see a deal where Mike Conley is dealt to a team that needs a point guard. Maybe it's the Suns. Maybe it is, it could be, maybe it's the Jazz. I mean, it could be anyone that needs a point guard to pair along, maybe a young star, or just needs someone to calm things down and shore up the way the team is run. I certainly can see them trading Mike Conley, first of all, to get off under that contract, and to just let it be Ja Morant to take the reins. I mean, Ja Morant is an electric player. He's drawn those comparisons to Russell Westbrook. He was fantastic for Murray State in the NCAA tournament this past March. And I think that if you draft John Morant, you need to let him take the reins and figure it out right away. I mean, you can't fool around with having Mike Conley still there, taking minutes away from a guy that needs all the reps he can get, still paying that guy $30 million, especially when you still have that ridiculous eyesore of the Chandler Parsons contract that they still haven't been able to get off their books. I think this means it's the end of the Mike Conley era in Memphis, who likely could go down as maybe the best player in franchise history. I mean, Mike Conley has been that good for so long. He's probably one of the best players to have never made an All-Star team. He's been that good. But I do think that this signals the end of the Mike Conley era in Memphis, and it ushers in the new age of John Morant being their star, being their young stud, along with Jaren Jackson Jr., which I think can be a good duo going forward. I mean, it will remain to be seen how this franchise does going forward, if they're able to go on with that young core and start the full rebuild, but I do think that's a step in the right direction for the Memphis Grizzlies. So I definitely think that was a win for them as well. I mean, the Grizzlies came in as a team with also 6% chance of getting the number 1 overall pick, so similar to New Orleans. So the fact that they were able to get number 2, I think, was phenomenal. Obviously, we'd like to have Zion, but if you can get 2 in this draft, I think that was certainly a win for them. The biggest losers, I think the first one has to be clearly the New York Knicks. New York Knicks were going in all year tanking. They had the different edits made by fans, and they were all going all in for Zion, tanking for Zion. You saw a fan get Zion's name tattooed in the New York Knicks logo and font on their leg for some reason prior to the draft lottery, not even knowing if they were going to get that first overall pick. But clearly this was the worst possible scenario, I guess, for the Knicks outside of being beyond the top 3. I mean, they're still at number 3. They have a top 3 pick, which will likely be R.J. Barrett, and I'll get to him in a second. But I mean, I think this was worst case scenario with regards to the draft for the Knicks because they were going all in for Zion. Zion was going to be their poster boy. Like we talked about, the NBA would have loved to have a megastar like Zion in New York to revitalize that market, to revitalize basketball in New York City, to revitalize Madison Square Garden, the Knicks franchise as a whole. So that was worst case scenario for the NBA, for him to not go to a big market like New York, but also for the Knicks because they had invested so much and they were banking entirely on getting Zion this offseason. Now the focus for the Knicks is going to switch to free agency. I mean, they can still get Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant. There's still options for them in free agency with the money to do it, but I think they would have loved to have gone out and made those free agency signings while also having Zion Williamson to be their star of the future, to learn from those guys. Unfortunately, that won't be the case for the Knicks, but they're still in the sweepstakes for Anthony Davis. There's potentially they could trade this pick to get Anthony Davis from the Pelicans, and the Pelicans would end up with the first pick and the third pick in this 2019 NBA draft. But like I said, I think this is kind of not the ideal scenario for the Knicks, not what they wanted. Knicks fans are upset about it. They believe that things don't go their way. That's why it's a lottery. I mean, you weren't going to see a frozen envelope, I don't think, even if you believe in that sort of conspiracy. A lot of people were banking on it happening, but it certainly didn't pan out that way, with Zion ending up going to be a New Orleans Pelican. So I do think the Knicks were a big loser because they were banking so much on Zion and were unable to hit and get that pick. But you're still going to get a phenomenal player at number 3 in R.J. Barrett. If it goes as everyone expects it to go, Zion, Morant, then that third best player will be R.J. Barrett, the shooting guard from Duke, who I think he gets a bad rep. I think R.J., a lot of people just kind of made assumptions about his game, maybe including myself, but made assumptions and judgments on his game from 2 games in the NCAA tournament where he had a tendency to shoot his team out of the game, didn't defer to Zion when probably Zion was a better option, especially in those games against whether it was UCF or whoever it was in the NCAA tournament. He did, I guess, rub some people the wrong way there, but I think R.J. Barrett's still a phenomenal player. I think he has the ability to be a good scorer, a good defender. He's a good ball handler, so he can run the offense as well. And I think he's a guy that is not afraid of the spotlight, not afraid of the bright lights, and could end up turning into a star in New York. He might not be Zion Williamson, but there's a good chance that R.J. Barrett, who I always thought was the more polished player in this draft anyways, ends up being the best player in this draft just because he has so much natural talent, so much natural ability and skill already. He's probably more of a developed, polished player than anyone else in this draft. So I do think there's still some silver lining for the Knicks, but clearly they were going all in for Zion Williamson and were unable to get that to become a reality, which in a sense, I think makes them one of the bigger losers in this draft because that's what they needed. They needed something, a slam dunk in this draft. And although R.J. Barrett's still a phenomenal player, it probably would have been best case scenario for the Knicks to get Zion Williamson. The other loser, and you really hate to see it, but I think it is the Phoenix Suns, who you see there ended up with the 6th pick. The Suns coming in were tied with the Cavs and the Knicks for the best odds of getting the number 1 pick. 14% chance of getting first overall. They end up getting 6 in this draft. And this is a team that was desperately in need of a point guard or just a star transcendent talent in Zion. So it would have been phenomenal if they got 1 or 2. Ja Morant probably would have been the best to fix their needs, as Zion still, though, would have just been an absolute game changer for them. They end up getting 6, and when you look at this draft now, as I want to kind of give a look to my tentative mock draft, like I said, I think it goes Zion, Morant, Barrett at 1, 2, and 3 to the Pelicans, Grizzlies, and Knicks. But then you have the Lakers at 4 and the Cavs at 5. Outside of those 3, I mean, this is not a very deep draft, and I think this is a draft where a lot of these picks and projections are kind of up in the air. And if you're the Suns right now, the 6th best player ranked in this draft, according to ESPN, is Jarrett Culver out of Texas Tech, who's, a long, athletic shooting guard out of Texas Tech. He was a guy that really didn't have some great performances in the Final Four and the national championship game, so that may have soured a lot of people to his potential NBA prospects, but I still think he's a solid player. But, you look at those guys that are outside of those top 3 in the rankings of this current draft class. It's Darius Garland, the point guard from Vanderbilt, DeAndre Hunter, the small forward from Virginia, Culver, like I said, and then you have Cam Reddish as well, rounding out probably the top 7 players. Cam Reddish is another guy that there's question marks about him. How will he fare at the next level? He didn't shoot the ball necessarily well at Duke. He had some struggles. It took him a while to figure things out, and he never really did, I guess. He had a few bright spots, but overall he never really got things to click under Mike Krzyzewski at Duke. So I don't know what you do here if you're the Lakers, who, I think there's a good chance they end up just trading this pick, whether if it's a package for Anthony Davis or for another star to pair with LeBron. So I think there's a good chance that maybe they don't make this pick. But if they do, you're still going to get an okay player or a solid player that is going to contribute and add to this young core that'll probably help you once the LeBron era is done. But this is still not a slam dunk. The Lakers aren't getting one of those top 3 guys, so it kind of is, maybe they are better off trading this, but they have a lot of options there. And if you're the Cavaliers, a lot of those top guys are point guards, especially a guy like Darius Garland who might be there. But you already have a point guard in Colin Sexton who showed consistent improvement over his first season in the NBA. I guess you can go after a guy like DeAndre Hunter or Cam Reddish. But still, the Cavs are a team, they can kind of do whatever, but they probably would have benefited more from pairing a guy like R.J. Barrett or Zion with Colin Sexton to be the future of this franchise. So they're kind of up in there. They can do a lot of things. It's kind of whoever these teams at 4, 5, and 6 they could end up going in this draft. It's kind of up in the air here, and they could go in any direction, really, even going as far as to trade the pick to improve their standing going forward. But I think for the Suns, I think you're in the worst possible scenario. You missed last year by making the pick of DeAndre Ayton first overall in the draft, missing out on 2 guys that had phenomenal years and could both be Rookie of the Year in Trae Young and Luka Doncic. So you missed on those guys. You have Devin Booker, who's your young star, but he clearly needs help. He cannot do it all. And you missed on a bunch of draft picks over the years as well, whether it be Dragon Bender or I feel like there's too many to keep track of and to name right off the top of my head here, but they needed a transcendent talent to get things going. They needed to hit on a draft pick, and now you're in a tough situation at 6 where you don't know if any of these guys are going to pan out. You don't know how any of these guys are going to fare at the NBA level, and it's kind of a situation where it was the worst possible scenario for the Suns. They had 14% odds to get the top pick and they end up getting 6th. Not a good look if you're the Phoenix Suns. They're going to have a lot of work to do, potentially trading up in this draft. Maybe the Lakers are a team that want to acquire more role players and trade back, or trading up with the Cavaliers, who might want to do the same thing. So there's options there for the Suns still, but still they would have been perfect for them to be able to get that first or second overall pick to fix their needs that they have right now. Unable to do that, it's kind of a bad spot for the Suns going forward here. But as we said, we talked about the draft lottery. As I said, the Pelicans getting the first overall picks. The Grizzlies at 2, Knicks at 3, Lakers at 4, and Cleveland at 5, with the Suns at 6. And once again, I'll show you the full lottery picks here. At 7 was the Bulls, who also have a lot of work to do. The Hawks at 8, a chance they want to trade up or even could trade back because they really like the young core that they have going forward here. And then at 9, you have Washington. Washington, another team that might try to trade up because they have a lot of holes that they need to fill. They need young talent. 10, Atlanta once again. So Atlanta maybe could package those 2 picks. They got that one from Dallas. So Atlanta at 9 and 10, or at 8 and 10, maybe a chance that Atlanta could package those both picks to move up in the spot of a team like, let's say, the Lakers or Cleveland or the Suns, something along those lines, a team that wants to double up and just get more options in this first round of the 2019 NBA draft. Minnesota 11, who needs to figure things out. I mean, Andrew Wiggins has not worked and is making a ton of money. Karl-Anthony Towns is still one of the best young players in the league, but they definitely need help and have holes to fill like everyone here. Charlotte at 12, a team that narrowly missed the playoffs. That are going to try and re-sign Kemba Walker this offseason, even though he's approaching 30 years old. They need some young talent on that team as well to inject some life back into them. Miami at 13, a team that has assets and that has, I think, aspirations to move up in this draft potentially. I mean, there was a shot that maybe Miami could be a team that got lucky and moved up. They were also a team that narrowly missed the playoffs, but they're looking for the heir apparent to add to the young core they already have with the Dwayne Wade era coming to an end. And then 14, Boston, who, they got that one from Sacramento via the 76ers. So Boston somehow still getting first-round picks because of the expert wizardry of Danny Ainge accumulating draft picks and assets over the last 8 years or so. They round out the lottery picks at number 14. So that being said, now I want to move on to the Western Conference Finals. As for some reason, it feels like it's the back burner right now, or the secondary headlines of the week, but it was the draft, and it definitely was an exciting NBA draft lottery. But my first topic is, what do the Blazers have to do to get back in this series? Down 2-0. They lost last night by 3 to the Warriors. A chance for Damian Lillard to get the last-second shot to tie the game or to win it, and got fouled and stripped by Andre Iguodala, which ended up giving the Warriors the win on that clutch defensive play by him. I think if you're the Blazers, I mean, you're in a tough spot here because you've kind of had to give all of your effort, your energy to get to this point. It's already a great, successful season. They were able to get to the Western Conference Finals after back-to-back first-round exits the last 2 years. But I think the one thing that really stands out is Damian Lillard has to be better. And I know that he has to be probably tired, fatigued. He has been carrying a lot of the load in that last series, went to 7 games, and I believe he's played something like 9 games in 18 days, something along those lines. I get that, and guys get tired. But on the other side, it's the NBA playoffs. It's the Western Conference Finals. You did everything over the summers building up to this point to have this opportunity to get to the NBA Finals. You can't be tired now. You have to do what you have to do. You have to push through it. You have to play better. And Damian Lillard has, unfortunately, not played well enough thus far in the NBA playoffs. I mean, he has really he's been subpar here ever since he hit that shot against the Thunder to eliminate them in that first-round series. It seems like it's been downhill, and I was ready to crown Dame as clearly the second-best point guard in the NBA behind Steph Curry. And, it was going into the playoffs. It was kind of a toss-up for me between Westbrook, Lillard, Kyrie Irving. And now all of those guys have really soured their games, soured themselves towards me of what I think of them going forward. it's kind of a toss-up, and Dame especially. He's gone the deepest in the playoffs here, advancing all the way to the conference finals, but he has been really lackluster. He was 6 of 16 with 2 turnovers, -7 box score plus-minus in Game 2, which was that 114 and 111 loss to the Warriors. Just 23 points. He did have 10 assists, so he's getting other guys involved, but he certainly needs to be better because he did not have a good game in Game 1 either, not in Game 7 against the Nuggets, closing out that series, even though they were able to be victorious. Dame has to be better. The other thing, too, is this supporting cast of the Blazers, they didn't have a great game in Game 1. They did step up here in Game 2, but I think the other thing is they need to eliminate turnovers. And you had 2 turnovers from Dame, 4 from C.J. McCollum, 2 from Cantor. And this whole team is just doing a terrible job of holding on to the basketball, and you can't do that against the Warriors because you know that they love to get in transition. They love to get transition threes, and that's kind of the way that those patented Warriors scoring runs where all of a sudden you're down by 13 when you were up by 1 is because you turn the ball over, they get easy shots at the other end, threes in transition, and all of a sudden that barrage of three-point shots buries you, and sometimes teams never recover. That was the way the Warriors were able to climb back in this game to end up getting the 3-point victory, a game that the Trailblazers led for a good portion of it, and that's kind of the scenario that they have to do all they can to avoid. It was really that 39-point third quarter for the Warriors that were able to get them to climb back in this game, outscoring Portland by 15 there in the third. So they have to do better taking care of the basketball. Dame's got to play better. It's as simple as that. And they have to I think the one other thing, too, is I think it's clear that they need to now insert Rodney Hood into the starting lineup. Rodney Hood has consistently all playoffs been a stud for them off the bench, and it's coming to the point where, and I want to say it was Mark Jackson or Jeff Van Gundy on the broadcast that said, maybe it's time that you need to shake up this starting lineup if you're the Trailblazers. I mean, this starting lineup was great against the Thunder in the first round. You went to 7 against the Nuggets. They were able to find some issues, and now you're down 2-0 to the Warriors going back home to Portland. Maybe it's time now where a change needs to be made in this starting lineup to give you a chance to climb back in this series and to not go down 3-0. If you go down 3-0, it's all but lost. It's already looking dire, down 2-0, returning to the Moda Center in Portland. So I think the move they need to make is inserting Rodney Hood into the starting lineup. And the guy that I would probably take out would be Aminu. I mean, Aminu, he had 9 points for you in Game 2, 3 of 8, and he's rebounding the basketball at 6 rebounds to lead to tie for the team lead. But I think you need to keep Cantor in there because Cantor is such a physical presence down low. He can bang down there with Looney, with Jordan Bell, Bogut, whoever's playing down low. Aminu's kind of the lost man. I know he's a great defender, but maybe you need to sacrifice defense because you need to get more offensive threats. You need to get a guy who's playing great basketball on the floor, and that has to be Rodney Hood. And he's been phenomenal all playoffs for them coming off the bench. Aminu may be the guy that you move to the bench, and maybe you still play probably 20 minutes a night or so, but he's a guy that you put in as a spot defender because he has been playing good defense, but he's not a guy who has to be matched up with Durant now. I mean, he can kind of move around and guard a bunch of different guys, whereas Rodney Hood, who's a solid defender, he's not a phenomenal defender, but he's a solid defender, but he's a guy offensively especially who can get them easy shots, can take some of the pressure off Dame and CJ in that starting lineup. A third guy that can get his own bucket, which is really what they need right now. I think that's going to be a key decision for them. We'll see if Terry Stotts makes it. Inserting Rodney Hood in that starting lineup for Game 3 back in Portland against the Warriors down 2-0. But moving on to the other conference final, this one in the East, the Raptors lost Game 1 to the Bucks. They fell by 8, 108-100 to Milwaukee in Game 1. Milwaukee now is the 1-0 leader with one game still in Milwaukee before the series heads even farther north to Toronto. I think the problem for the Raptors here is they played a really good game, and the Bucks played probably one of their average games, a C-plus game, I would call it, for the Bucks. I mean, no one was really phenomenal for them outside of Lopez. I mean, Giannis had kind of a pedestrian day. I mean, he was 7 of 16. He had 14 rebounds. He had 6 assists. He just had 24 points. And he had 5 turnovers. I mean, Kawhi made things really difficult for him, guarding him as we all expected him to in Game 1. But it was really Brook Lopez who had 29 points and 11 rebounds and 4 blocks that really was his coming out party. A guy that incredibly is making $3.4 million this year or something like that. A guy that the Lakers had no interest in re-signing, but a guy that probably would have solved a lot of their issues, especially stretching the floor from 3 because he was 4 of 11 in Game 1. But they had a subpar game. I mean, Middleton had 11 points. He was 4 for 12 from the field. He had 4 turnovers. Eric Bledsoe was a non-factor. He shot 25% from the field in Game 1. And the only guy off the bench that really had any impact was Brogdon, who had 15. But you look at the game for the Raptors played a solid game. I mean, I know that Siakam wasn't great. He shot 30% from the field with 15 points. You look at Kawhi was phenomenal. 31, perfect from the free throw line, 10 of 26 from the field. He had 9 rebounds as well, 3 steals. And you finally got a good, strong playoff performance from Kyle Lowry, who ended up with 30, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, and he was 7 of 9 from three-point range. Kyle Lowry was phenomenal in Game 1, a guy that I have consistently ripped for his playoff performances. Others in the national media, in the Toronto media, have ripped for his playoff performances. But you know what? He showed out for Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals, and you have to give him credit for that. But still, no one else contributed outside of Kawhi and Kyle Lowry, who combined for 61 points, but the rest of the team combined for 39. And you just can't have that. The bench was atrocious. They only got 12 bench points, who, even though no one really had outside of Brogdon, had a big impact off the bench for the Bucks had 22 bench points. So that's 10 more bench points, which was probably the biggest factor in this game because it was an 8-point win for the Bucks. So if you just had a little more production from your bench guys, from Ibaka, from Powell, from Fred VanVleet, who all had pretty lackluster days, it would have been a different case for the Raptors. And maybe we see the Raptors up 1-0 with a chance to maybe split it 1-1 heading back to Toronto. But it ends up being just the Lowry and Kawhi show, and now those guys combine for 61, and no one else picks up the slack. Siakam, like I said, didn't really have a great game in Game 1, and Danny Green really was a non-factor. Marc Gasol just had 6 points, but he did have 12 big rebounds and 2 blocks. But, I mean, you got to get it done on the scoreboard. You lost by 8 points because none of the role players outside of the guys who are making the most money on this team, Kawhi and Lowry, no one else stepped up. And, you know, do I think that will happen going forward? I'm not sure. I think the Bucks are a deep team, the Bucks are a talented team, and the Bucks are a team that can beat you in a lot of ways. And the Bucks really played an average game while the stars of the Raptors played a phenomenal game and still weren't able to get the victory. So I think that you're going to have to continue to see those performances by Kyle Lowry. He's going to have to still be around the 30-point mark. He's going to have to shoot the ball well continuously throughout the series if they want a chance. Kawhi is going to, I think regardless, continue to be phenomenal because he's been phenomenal all playoffs. I mean, he is like inserted himself. If the MVP award continued into the postseason, he'd probably insert himself right in the mix because of the way he's played in the postseason. I mean, he has been that good. He has been an absolute stud and has looked like probably the best player in the entire playoffs to this point on both ends of the floor. But I'm not sure if the Raptors do have enough, because if we see more consistent performances like that from their bench players, from the role guys, I'm not sure if they're going to have enough to end up knocking off the Milwaukee Bucks. So with that, that'll do it for us here on Pittsburgh Sports Live for another edition of The Corner 3. As always, click the subscribe button. Supporting Pittsburgh Sports Live helps us out a lot, lets us keep the lights on here in our studio above Market Square in downtown Pittsburgh. Also, subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter as well. And you can follow me on Twitter at Cale_Berger. But that's going to do it for us here on a Friday edition of The Corner 3 on Pittsburgh Sports Live. We'll be back with more analysis of the Western Conference Finals and all the happenings in the NBA going forward. We'll be back next week. See you next week on Pittsburgh Sports Live.